Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Today we are going to take a look at our first essay, which is going to help us enter into digital media, Bolter's Seeing and Writing. He tries to look at the changes in the perception of the text, in the handling of the text as it comes about with the coming of the digital media, but he does so by placing everything within a historical context. In fact, that is probably the only way we can understand the digital media, by placing it in the entire context of changing textualities across history, across human history, across the history of communication. And that is exactly what we are also trying to achieve, we are trying to work with in this particular course. And he begins his essay by looking at the effect of print on letters, where letters were formed, where underwent changes ever since the discovery of alphabet, since the discovery of writing. The formation of letters undergo a certain degree of change, as you would understand, as you would know through common knowledge. The written letter is different from the printed letter. The print is formed differently. There are certain cases where print does try to emulate the handwritten letters. However, that does not work out very efficiently, because the way the medium of print operates and the way it shows up on paper is very different from the way handwritten documents show up on paper. So, over the years, over the centuries, ever since the discovery of printed fonts have undergone transformation. Different fonts, which we understand, are useful for different circumstances, right, for whatever kind of use. If you want to put up a poster, certain kind of fonts work. On the screen, certain kinds of font work, which may not work well on paper. So, each particular kind of surface requires different kind of lettering, and therefore, there is a constant turnover of letters. So, he looks at the way in which in print actually there is an attempt to actually look at the visual transformation of the letters to a visual minimum, keeping it, and that is what works within print. In print, they try to make the letter less obtrusive. If you can see, here on screen, you can see several instances of various kinds of fonts which are used, which we can come across. But the one that is number 2 is the one which closely emulates a kind of a calligraphic style of writing. Now, it is not a very efficient one, it does not work well with the eye. It looks very beautiful in ornamentation, but it looks very beautiful in ornamentation primarily if it is hand produced, if it is manually produced, because that would also allow a certain kind of embellishment using illumination and other kinds of calligraphic techniques. However, because the printed letter is flat, it does not have a very good effect. Certainly, what we are perceiving right now is on the screen, and as we can see on the screen, it is number 1 and number 3 that works really much better, because the letters are full, there is no hollowness within it, and even within it My opinion would be that it is number 3 which works better, because the font is much more chiseled and has a greater degree of clarity. So, there are finer nuances with each particular font that is used. So, number 3 is the most developed font within the history of print. It is the least obtrusive, and that is what we understand by the effect of print on letters. Now, we know that writing systems have always been adapted, always undergoing changes through history, various kinds of experiments, and the handwritten manuscript would be one in which the attempt would be to fill up the entire page. Okay, there should not be any space which is left vacant, right. Now, and therefore, the urge to ornament and sort of fill up the entire spot. A part of that idea comes from the fact that the initiation of illuminated manuscripts actually emerges from ornamentation within ecclesiastical monument, either churches or mosques or mausoleums, and there certainly the attempt is to embellish the entire monument, entire surface, wherever ornamentation is to be done with either inscription or through ornamentation through lattice work or mosaic work or various other kind of things. So it sort of gets adapted to the white page, and it is the same kind of techniques that now in miniature get practiced on parchment, right. So, what we see usually is that whenever there is a new kind of technology that is used, that comes into being, the technology actually tries to initially emulate the pre-existing one, right, because that is what the users, the general the customers, or those who are going to be the recipients of that particular article, that particular text are used to, and always the attempt when there is introduction of new technology there, it tries to suggest that you can continue doing what you are doing with far greater efficiency. You really do not have to change your usage patterns, you do not have to abandon what you are used to, but we can produce it in a far more efficient manner, perhaps much cheaper, and that is always the way in which technology initially is introduced. But when the technology gets initiated and people get used to that technology, the technology comes on its own and creates conventions of its own, which are very, very different from the technology it is replacing. And I mean, today's day and age, we find these kind of technological shifts happening at a much swifter rate. In the era that we are talking about, that which is the discovery of print or the introduction of writing, it would have taken several generations for these shifts to actually start getting initiated, because we move at we live in a world of very fast moving technological change, and the human mind is constantly trying to adapt to technological shifts. So we find that in the manuscript age there were myriad scripts throughout Western Europe. It was not that there was a singular font that was used. Everybody wrote with a similar style, and this would have been true of manuscript writing elsewhere in the world as well, not only Western Europe, because As we know, handwriting is idiosyncratic, and it is, but it is also cultural. The way certain texts are written within a certain school of thought or practice, there is a certain standard that is set. Even today, we find that certain publishing houses would have certain standard fonts that they use for various particular purposes. What I just showed you here in these examples of the fonts is an illustration from 1908 Chambers. The Chambers publishing uses these fonts as various kind of styles, and each of these fonts have specific names there: Gothic, Clarendon, black letter, and antique. These are the font styles which are approved, and for all their publications they would use these fonts, something for the title page, something for the chapter heading, something for the actual text. So that these styles would be fixed. So similarly, even in handwriting, within a certain shop, a certain manuscript generation center, there would be certain kinds of styles of writing, certain basic standard practices, the way the layout of the page would be. There would be certain very standard practices that would be used, and there would be, of course, a hybrid of various kinds of pictorial elements, and this is something that we had seen when we were looking at the manuscript formation, that there would be certain sets of designs which would be available with certain bookmakers, booksellers, stationers. They would have a certain set of styles from which customers would choose to customize their particular manuscript, and these designs would also be held as kind of secret, that this is the USP, the unique selling point of this particular bookseller. The neighboring bookseller has a different set of styles, and people are also trying to sometimes steal these styles, so that they can make earn a little bit more, capture a little bit more of the market, and sometimes these styles would travel with the workman, with people who would move between print workshops, as we had seen in Darnton's work, that there was no fixed recruitment for the print shops. They would recruit labor according to the job, and therefore labor was constantly searching for new work, and therefore they were constantly mobile, and this labor would sometimes carry with them certain styles and try to emulate them and work with them. Though with the coming of print, it is not this the style book that matters, it is also the kind of typefaces which are available to particular print shops that also do matter. In print, however, we have a variety of fonts, which are used. The number of fonts which are available increases with the advancement of printing. As I was just saying, that within typography, within the traditional Gutenberg printing presses, or the very early printing presses, the way the manual typesetting would happen is that there would be a certain kind of set of typefaces which would be laid out on the desk, and the typesetter would have to pick them up according to the written manuscript, and in a particular scale place each of the typefaces and create single lines of text, which are then put, and these are all in mirror images, and place them in a lattice. So in this kind of a technology, the number of fonts which are available to a particular printer would be limited, would be much smaller. But with the coming of you know, the more automated printing machines, you would have cartridges, you would have particular cassettes of fonts which are which would be stored, and printers would have some of the bigger publishers would have these very large libraries of fonts. You know, in the when printing happens within large publishing houses through the linotype machine, and the linotype machine would have these fonts which would be placed within certain cassettes installed, and the operator at the point of typing out the line of text has to specify which particular font is going to be used, and the fonts would be, and the machine would pick out the fonts automatically as the typing happens and put them in a within the line. And once the lead the molten lead sort of captures that particular image of that particular line, the fonts would then go back and drop back into the cassette, and at the end of the usage the cassette can be returned back to the library. So, in these kind of situations, large publishing houses would have very large library of fonts. So, there could be a whole many variety of fonts that could be there. But of course, you do understand there would be separate cassettes for each particular alphabet. You know, particular font sizes would be different. A cassette may have the italics or the bold. So the entire font system is very complicated as we move in technology. But with the coming of the digital, certainly there is far greater degree of fonts. We virtually any single computer would have at least about 50 fonts pre-installed in it, and those who are interested in typesetting documents, they would have far greater number of fonts which are there. So, the exponential variety of fonts which are there in the digital digital format of publishing is much greater. So, as we see with advancement of technology, actually the variety available with every single operator increases, and therefore, at one level the variety with every single operator increases, but at another level there is a certain uniformity that creeps in, right. You know, in the manuscript age, in the medieval age, the variety would be like language, because as you go to different booksellers, they would be using different styles which are unique to them, which are cannot be replicated by other publishers. Whereas in the case of modern day printing, virtually every typesetter has access to some of the top fonts, and those are the fonts that would be used within printing. In fact, there is a very informative and entertaining documentary on the font Helvetica, which captures how Helvetica becomes a very important font in the history of advertising and in the history of billboards. If you can watch that movie and understand what are the nuances of creation of fonts, or the choice of fonts, and fonts do also have a certain cultural impact. People get used to seeing a certain kind of font in a certain particular kind of context. The moment the font changes, you have a feeling which is very different. You feel and therefore a font has a certain cultural baggage, a certain tradition, builds up a certain tradition with itself. For example, a font like Comic Sans is something that would immediately give a sense that the text is non-serious. you can put a serious text within a Comic Sans font, but the reader immediately understands that this is I mean that this is perhaps a non-serious text. So every font also has a certain cultural baggage, and that is something that we need to also understand, to be able to understand how printing and expression through writing has changed across the centuries. Prints also use are able to use diagrams and graphs, as we had seen with the development of various kinds of graphic reproduction systems through lithography. The creation of diagrams and graphs become a lot easier. This is very important for scientific publishing, but in modern day, of course, we do not have to depend on all that. We had other kinds of techniques where hand created documents can be scanned and easily printed, mass printed. Computerization, the digital media actually allows writers to create their own fonts, and I mean if one is particularly very creative enough, you can actually modify and use your own font. Certainly one can use one's own font of choice from a library of fonts if one is not creating the fonts, and very interestingly, any particular web page that is there, if in the browser I do set my default font to be a different font, and you can of course do it on your phone. For example, in your phone display settings, you can go and set a particular font as your default font, and you would find that in various cases where certainly the various applications that are there, the home screen and other kinds of settings pages on the phone will all appear in that font. You can choose the font size to your particular particular choice, as well as the fact that some websites may set the font to the default according to the particular user. So one can of course put that setting in the browser, exploit that setting in the browser, and get to see web pages in the font of one's choice. Certainly size of the lettering can easily be altered according to one's choice. I can be able to watch read a particular web page at a font size of my choice, unlike that in the case of print. So the digital media actually allows not only writers but also viewers to be able to use a certain font according to one's choice. And then the most interesting thing about the digital media is that we now can use moving images along with the written form. In the case of print, certainly pictures would be associated with print. Initially very crude pictures, only black and white, but then with full color and photographic printing. But with the coming of the digital media, you have the use of animation and other sort of moving image elements. You can actually embed videos within the text, right? Now he takes a closer look at the manuscript universe, and he says that 13th century scribes developed certain visual cues to help the reader locate the text. So it was not simply just written text. The text would have certain elements within it which sort of become markers or kind of for readers to be able to bookmark the text, to be able to understand exactly which part of the text. And given that the codex is a form which is almost random accessible, right? I mean, one can, unlike the scroll, one doesn't have to actually go through all through to the desired spot to be able to locate it. With the codex, you can actually open it to a particular page that you were interested in, and therefore, they would scribes would try to develop certain kinds of mechanisms through which visual cues to help readers locate a particular text, and this is very important, especially within an ecclesiastical audience, because in cases of public reading, for example, when there are reading of various psalms or verses from the Bible in the church, the users would have to open their Bibles to specific passages in order to read from them, and therefore, the book needed to be easily navigable, and to be able to be navigable, they had to be specific kinds of cues. They had to be devised of things like page numbers or verse numbers, chapter titles, you know. So, and these were marked out through different kind of layout, different kind of font sizes, different kind of styles of writing within the letters, and there was so that the human eye can distinguish between various nodes of the text. There was also provision for marginal notes, where there would be white space which will be available by the sides, not within the particular textual area, but by the sides, where scholars can put in their explanations or commentary, and these would probably also get included into future versions of the text. So, when a scribe is copying from a venerated manuscript, may find that the commentary is particularly interesting, and also includes it as part of the written illustrated document. But with the coming of print, there are certain changes that go about in the particular kind of way in which the text operates. The early printed books attempted to replicate the layout of manuscripts. You know, the manuscript layout would primarily be in the form of columns, clear lines, as we can see. Dividing the text into different columns would make it easier to read, shorter width of the text. Remember, these were very large parchments, very large lettering. Books would be typically be much larger than the usual modern book form, and the layout would be according to the convenience of the writing as well as of the reading, and mostly be divided into columns. It took, so there were certain practices within handwriting, within calligraphy, which became the standard mechanisms of operation. But printers soon realized, after a few decades, that they could do away with some of the techniques which are commonplace in manuscript, and that they could do away with them. In fact, print actually might work better without them. One of the examples is the use of abbreviations and the use of ligatures. Now, you may be able to recognize they are a thing of the past, they are a vestigial element that, you know, on your right hand side you find that you know, two letters are collapsed into one, right. Now, this would be very useful while writing by hand, right, to actually collapse the two letters together. You know, there are many other examples of the use of ligatures. Sometimes they would be so the combination of A and E is also another very common example of the ligature, but this is actually when used in print is actually a vestige of the manuscript practice, and print can actually work in a far more chiseled fashion, and therefore, the one without the ligature actually works much better in print rather than the one on the right. Right. So, this is one practice that gets left behind, abandoned as print sort of comes onto its own. So, because the machine can be far more precise, all right, and the handwritten page has a certain organic beauty, because also do remember the two different kinds of techniques that are used. First of all, calligraphy uses a more flexible tip, right. It's either the you use the feather, the quill pen, or you use a brush, both of which are flexible, and so for when the surface is in touch with the paper, with the parchment, and it is leaving the parchment, it leaves a certain kind of a trail, it leaves a certain linearity to the kind of writing, whereas print works very differently. It is just an impression and up. So, the two processes of writing actually produce different kinds of lettering, and that is what printers very shortly learn, that they had to abandon certain kind of idiosyncrasies of manuscript writing and leave them behind and bring in a much more chiseled and better look towards it. All right. The notes which are there in the margins now move to the back of the book or the foot of the book, because that is where it becomes easier to organize the text, because the notes would be in a different font, different kind of format, and therefore, it's easier to sort of organize them all together. And in fact, certain publishers prefer to put notes in the end notes rather than in the footnotes, because whereas for the reader, I find it's easier that one uses the footnote, simply because you can refer to the footnotes as you read, whereas for the publisher it is perhaps easier to put the note in the end note, because then the pagination remains constant. The changes in the end notes do not sort of meddle with the pagination each time there is a change in the text. So, the focus really is on far greater focus on precision and detailing, because and as we have already noted, that there is a process which is involved in trying to ensure that there is a proper copy editing of the texts, because it is impossible to sort of recall hundreds of copies of text once if there is an error which is discovered. So, the process of copy editing actually is precisely a print practice rather than a manuscript practice, and print progressively uses lesser and lesser ink with more and more white space. The letters get much more chiseled, unlike the thick black letters of the manuscript, and so and this is what works well with newspapers and pulp fiction, where there is actually dealing with a lot of text. So, therefore, trying to make it as easier on the eye as possible. The single page has a lot of text, so and the font sizes really decrease. We find that the serif fonts become thinner as we move on. Just to leave a little note for you, there are various kinds of fonts, which are a variety of fonts, but the two very important distinction between two kinds of fonts is the serif font and the sans serif font. As you understand, the serif font is one which has the more pointed endings, all right, and the sans serif font have the blunt endings. Various kinds of fonts actually have two versions of themselves. One is the serif and the sans serif, all right. So, and various kinds of print technologies try to use different kinds of fonts. Normally, more serious books and reading items try to use the serif fonts, whereas we find more advertisements and others which are less classical, they try to use sans serif fonts. On screen, certainly sans serif works far better than serif fonts. They are easier on the eye, because on the screen you are looking at usually a backlit document, kind of a reading surface, or if you are watching this particular transmission on a projector, on a projected device, then you, certainly there's a lot of light coming your way from around the text, from all the white areas of the text of the screen, and it's the sans serif font which is easier on the eye. In print, text would be divided into various blocks, different shapes and sizes. They would be organized. Readers would easily be able to navigate between different blocks of texts. So, chapters or subheadings become a very important sort of way of differentiating between these blocks of text. And a very interesting thing about print and books is that the text remains stationary. It is the reader's eye that moves, whereas when you look at the screen, it is very different. It is the text that moves and the reader's eye remains stationary. So, as you can see, in the case of the digital text, it is the text that keeps moving, and the reader's eye is always looking at the text, right, and this is the way the text really is in the digital form. All right. So, there is, and now if we move to now he moves to a discussion to the word processor, with the coming of the word processor. Now, far greater freedom is there to the graphic freedom is there to the writer. The writer can now no longer only while writing, while the during the act of writing, the writer is not merely concentrating on the words, but also how it is to be presented. These typographical elements now move into the act of writing. Something that would have been the job of the typographer, the typesetter in the printing press, has now become the domain of the writer. When you are writing out a certain term paper or a report, you are supposed to have formatted it properly. If you do not format it in a presentable sort of way, your assignment may be returned. If you submit a manuscript to a publisher which is not properly formatted, then the publisher may return it for formatting it in a more intelligible sort of way, which is very strange, because it was in one generation actually the job of the typesetter to actually to look into these kind of formatting issues. Remember, there was a point of time when writers would submit documents, handwritten documents to the printer, not typed out, but now everybody expects that any kind of submission should happen in a typed sort of format. All right. And people try to decorate the text with different type sizes, styles and fonts, but a little bit of a warning that I would like to give you: it is better that a single particular text does not use too many fonts. It is not readable. The eye, it is hard on the eye. So, try to reduce, whenever you are writing, try to reduce the various kinds of type styles and font sizes and other kinds of decorative elements to a minimum in terms of variety. You can use decorative elements, but let there be maybe 2 or 3 different kinds of things that you do within a single page of text or a single document, and that is what works. Another problem of the digital space is that it is not possible to create subtle curves. Text often gets pixelated. Certainly, with the discovery of far higher resolution of texts, pixelation gets reduced. Now, you have more higher resolution screens, and with data becoming more easily available, certainly this effect of pixelation gets reduced as we move on with technology, but still you understand within the digital media every single spot, every single pixel is separately defined. That is what you talk about when you have to when you have a very higher resolution camera. The more megapixels that you use within the image, the when blown up the image will not get pixelated, and this is important for lettering, because if you are creating particular letters which are supposed to be expanded, which are enlarged, then this problem of pixelation might occur. So, that becomes an important choice. The impermanence of the electronic image discourages attention to finer detail, because people can recall it. So, you can post, as I said, you can post something, or on a website can be uploaded, and if there is a problem that is found, people can go in and make that correction. Though in situations where people do make mistakes, and there are others who would like to point out these mistakes, and they would resort to the permanent form, that is the screenshot, to be able to arrest that particular mistake. But once again, we must be very careful, because in the age of fakes, fake images, the people can actually pass off a fake screenshot as an authentic one. So, these various subtleties of type size and style are no longer very important, because the default settings of different browsers now, according to the screen size, the particular page layout is, suppose people are accessing the same text across different kinds of particular devices, different screen sizes. You can sometimes be looking at a very large screen, you can also be watching this particular thing looking at a particular page on a small mobile phone camera, or a tablet, or a desktop. So, various kinds of screens can be used to be able to access it, access a particular text. So adaptability becomes much more important than this kind of a fixed form. This computer typography renders the writing space as measurable. So, this is something very which you will see, that when you open a word processor, you get this rulers by the side, and this precise measurement of what is the spacing between words, single spacing, 1.5 spacing, how many centimeters from the left, how many centimeters from the right. The writing space becomes exactly measurable. You know exactly which part of the page that you are in. So, and they have the writing space certainly has always been measurable, because if we are looking at print, the printer certainly does all these exercises of precision, but these were never as important as in the kind of the WYSIWYG word processor. When I say WYSIWYG, I mean what you see is what you get. What you are seeing on your screen is exactly how the page will get printed out. So, while writing, you are already aware of the composition of the text, how the text would be looking like. It is very much like a playwright writing a play and seeing the play in action, right. That is not what traditionally writers would do. The writers would not be aware of the kind of print. Certainly, writers, novelists even today may not be so much aware of the exact placing of particular letters, but because they would go through a certain process before the book is published. But if you are printing a report, term paper, then or a letter, you know exactly what format that you are typing it out in. So, therefore, all these measurements enter the writing stage rather than in the printing stage. All right. So, the computer window becomes a framing device. We can actually fathom any particular text that occurs within the space, the length and breadth of the screen, and that is the amount of text that you can hold. This is very different from the written page, where the written page has a certain standard size, and that is the amount of text that you can see. The computer window, however, can be enlarged. I can reduce this, and see this becomes an indefinite sort of 2-dimensional space. I can keep on increasing it. Even on the word processor, you know, I can keep adding as many pages as I want. There is no finiteness to it. And if I change the view to that of a web page, then one can keep on scrolling infinitely. In fact, this mind map that I am using, this actually can keep on going infinitely to as big as possible, right. It can be a very a large mind map which could be there, and there is no limit. The digital space will keep on expanding to accommodate as much as I want to write, right. And I can zoom at whatever level that I really desire, and to be able to make my point, all right, and as much text that is necessary. So, I do not, so unlike a manuscript writer who had to actually had to choose the gatherings very carefully, remember, they would have to choose the gatherings very carefully, because if the writing does not, the page does not fill up within that particular size of the parchment, you know, the prepared parchment, then it would create a problem, because there would be a lot of white space that would be left. And therefore, and certainly newspapers have this kind of a problem, because they would have to they have to sort of fill in a certain white space. If there is a certain kind of a story which is not really been able to fill up the entire page. You have never seen a newspaper with a certain white space that is left behind. You may have seen books with a couple of 2 or 3 empty pages here and there, but you would never see a newspaper with a large white space. The newspaper will always be would be complete in the sort of text. That is when they would enlarge a certain, put in a certain photograph just to fill that space up, or they might have some story which has very very long shelf life and low on immediate news value, which can be pulled out from a rejected story from the previous day and put in there simply to fill up that white space. So, the print has a kind of definiteness. You know, a newspaper, if it is an 8-page newspaper, every day the newspaper publishers will have to ensure there are 8 pages of news that are there. This is also very interestingly true for TV channels. 24-hour TV channels, they need 24-hour programming to be able to keep on running it at all time all the time. So, therefore, there are various kinds of repeats of programs which they have to constantly bring in, and they have to produce. If you cannot report enough news, you have to produce the news in your own studio at prime time. So, various kinds of media have various kinds of imperatives, and the digital space allows this possibility of an indefinite kind of space. It can be as small as you want, it can be as large as you want, all right. But you really cannot be as large as you want, because the human mind cannot read infinite amounts. So, that is one drawback, which we will discuss in a different lecture. And this is the first time in the history of writing that the writer actually operates with an indefinite kind of space. These windows can be stacked. As you can see, I have several of these tabs which are opened, which I have opened through the duration of the lecture, and they are all stacked one after another, and we can access them at random access. Whereas in the case of a book, you open to a particular page at a time. You can of course open several books at different points of time, but you can and you can actually simultaneously see different pages, but on the computer screen you can actually only see a certain number of texts. You can of course, I can of course separate the window, I can resize them and place them one beside and alongside each other. So, these are some of the different ways in which the digital media work. Now, we come to the hypertext. Hypertext is a particular format which allows the linking of texts between windows and between different kind of texts. And the text, as we know, in the case of the digital, it is the text that moves, but the reader's eye remains stationary. The text is what keeps moving, the reader's eye is stationary. This is also true of electronic billboards, where the text would keep on scrolling and moving, the reader's eye remains stationary, right. So, these are the various ways in which the digital media actually operate differently. After that, Bolt goes into discussing the difference between various kinds of reading practices or perception of the text, and he actually gives us a certain overview. Some of these matters we have covered in other lectures, it would be useful to just go over them. So, when writing emerges, it creates a dichotomy between the image and the sign, and he says that the act of writing actually pulls the reader towards the linear space, whereas the oral, as we said, the oral can be dissociated, it can link between various nodes of the text randomly, whereas in writing there is a certain linearity. You have to write one thing after another, you cannot, there has to be a certain sequence in which things are written. And and when things are written down in the early days of writing, even now, when you are reading something, what you are doing is the writing itself doesn't carry a meaning. When you read it, you are actually vocalizing that word, and that the vocalization is what gives you the meaning. So, and there is an impulse to decorate the writing space within the manuscript universe that he talks about, and that is something that we see in the form of the manuscript illumination to fill up that visual space. And that impulse, as I said, arises from the practice of decorating the visual space within ecclesiastical monuments for the faithful to be occupied. All right, as we had noted that it is a technique to help the mind concentrate, to focus on the visual element, while the written text is being sort of understood and imbibed. All right. So, illuminations help concentrate, help hold attention, and however, with print there is strictest separation between spaces, between typefaces, the pictorial between the textual space and the pictorial space. The two are separated. They are, you do not have writing sort of intermingling with pictures. There is far clearer separation between the pictorial and the verbal, and however, with electronic writing we find that both there is a certain synonymity between kind of intermingling, interweaving of word and images, because both words and images are stored as binary codes. That is what ultimately the machine understands. All right. This is the format in which any document that it be there at the end of the day, this is what the computer actually stores, either a 0 or a 1, or a on and a off, or a yes and a no. That is the binary code that every document, no matter what you have written, it could be an image, or it could be a piece of written text. At the end, in the back end, this is the ultimate machine readable form which the machine understands. and there is a certain algorithms, there is a certain code through which the machine actually decodes this a series of ones and zeros, and able to serve it up to the human eye or the human user as one in a format that one can use. Now, what this does is that, therefore, for the machine to be able to combine images and text together is far easier, which is something that printing cannot do. In print, for a very long period of time, the way of handling images is very different from the way word or text is handled, right. But we see that in the electronic form, words and images can be combined with greater ease. The importance of this is something that we will understand as we move along, because we can today theoretically, if you can think of it, and this is something that is very useful for digital humanists who work with the code behind the texts, behind humanities texts, is that it is possible, for example, to take a JPG file and create music out of it, because if you just change the algorithm, if you take an image file which may be stored in a GIF format or a JPG format, each of these formats are basically ways to converse with the machine, ways to tell the machine that this is how you are going to read that particular code, and this is the result that is going to be devised. Now, if we do a little sleight of hand and we sort of we tell the we confuse the computer and say read the JPG file as an MP3 format, then it will produce certain it can produce certain sound patterns, right. So the code can be intermingled, and therefore it is easier for the computer to actually locate certain patterns within the code and return certain very interesting results. Also, another thing that happens with electronic writing is that there is an increasing visualization of the presentation of texts, and this is something that is very interesting that you can do, is that you know, if you can go and experiment a little bit with the Google Ngram viewer. What the Google Ngram viewer does is Google today has a corpus of texts, a very huge number of text. You can see that button there which says search lots of books, all right. This button right here, if I can just blow it up a little bit, you will be able to see it a little bit more. It says search lots of books, enormous number of books. And what I have done is what has been done is I have just taken certain keywords and seen the occurrence of these words across the various centuries. What Google does is it presents the percentage presence of those the proportional presence of those words across the centuries, and we can come up with a very interesting kind of result, which shows how what is the distribution of each of these words across various books, and this can help us understand. For example, I can take another interesting sort of word and say which has been an important very important element in our study of this course, and let us see what result it produces. So, we find that you know, the use of democracy really rises, and if you see those two little peaks, and you see those, if you can see the kind of peaks which are there, can you identify what those peaks are? These are immediately post-war, post First and Second World War, that democracy takes a peak. The desire for democracy really rises after periods of intense wars. And these are the kind of cultural meanings that we can draw from these kind of tools. Now, this is happening because the machine is immediately in the moment has read millions of books and produced this result for us, right. And this is something that the human beings can never do, because and it is presenting it to us in a kind of a visual format, as a statistical format. But what we really have is a certain cultural data, all right. So, so we are able to understand this simply because that for the machine it is all a certain code that is there behind whatever it is doing, and therefore it can now create various diagrams and kind of maps and present data in a more visually perceptible sort of way. This has certain cultural effects. This kind of this tendency towards data visualization. These have certain cultural reasons why these visualizations do happen. The human eye is able to, when on the screen, perceive and read text. We are becoming weaker in being able to read longer bits of text. Our attention spans are falling, something that we will look at in a different lecture. We will study the matter, and therefore visualization of research data, of news data is becoming of paramount importance now. Thank you.